The Marvels. Marvel spent the better part of a decade convincing the world that its name on a poster guaranteed $1 billion. And then The Marvels grossed less than the average MCU sequel pulls in a single weekend. Released on November 10, 2023, the film was the direct sequel to 2019's Captain Marvel, which had grossed roughly $1.13 billion worldwide. Its production budget was reported by Variety and other trade outlets at around $275 million, with marketing and distribution adding roughly $100 million more for a total cost approaching $455 million. The worldwide theatrical gross came in at $206.1 million, $84.5 million domestic, and $121.6 million international, making it the lowest-grossing MCU film at the time of release. Deadline calculated a net loss of approximately $237 million, the largest single-film loss in MCU history. It opened to $46.1 million domestic, the lowest opening weekend ever for a Marvel Studios feature, and dropped 78% in its second weekend. Disney stopped publicly reporting the film's grosses partway through its run, which Variety and Deadline both flagged as unusual for the studio. Director Nia DaCosta became the first black woman to helm an MCU film, and the cast paired Brie Larson with Iman Vellani as Ms. Marvel and Teyonah Parris as Monica Rambeau. Pre-release tracking, toy lines, and theme park integration all confirmed that the franchise was being treated as a tentpole. This was the moment the post-Endgame slump stopped being a discussion and started being a number, and Disney's response, with quieter releases and a recalibrated TV slate, reads directly off this loss. Terminator: Dark Fate. Paramount and Skydance got the original director, the original star, and the original Sarah Connor back in the same movie, and the franchise still ended up frozen in carbonite. Released November 1st, 2019, its production budget ran between $185 and $196 million, with marketing adding another $80 to $100 million on top. Worldwide theatrical gross was $261.1 million, and The Hollywood Reporter and Variety both calculated a net loss of roughly $122 million. The film brought back Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton as Sarah Connor, with James Cameron returning as a producer for the first time since 1991's Terminator 2. Tim Miller of Deadpool directed, conceived as the start of a new trilogy that would replace the discontinuities of Genesis and Salvation. It opened to $29 million domestic against tracking that had projected $40 to $47 million. After the loss, Skydance and Paramount publicly shelved further sequel development, and the live-action Terminator franchise has been dormant since. The audience had been told for years that the franchise's problem was the absence of Cameron and Hamilton. When both returned and the box office stayed flat, the studios learned that the Terminator brand itself had aged out of theatrical economics. Fantastic Four, 2015. Fox spent more than a decade trying to make Fantastic Four work, and the 2015 reboot was the swing that finally sent the rights packing back to Marvel. Released August 7th, the production budget was around $120 million, with marketing pushing total spend past $200 million. Worldwide gross came in at $167.9 million, and trade outlets pegged the studio loss at $60 to $100 million. Director Josh Trank publicly disowned the film on Twitter the night before release, citing a fantastic version he had been forced to abandon. The planned sequel was cancelled within weeks, and the rights returned to Marvel Studios via Disney's 2019 acquisition of Fox. The film holds a 9% score on Rotten Tomatoes, the lowest of any superhero film at the time.
Solo: A Star Wars Story. For 40 years, every theatrical Star Wars release had been a guaranteed payday, and then in May of 2018, the franchise produced its first outright money loser. Released May 25, 2018, Solo carried a production budget reported between $275 and $300 million after extensive reshoots, making it the most expensive Star Wars film ever made. Worldwide gross came in at $393.2 million, well below the roughly $500 million Lucasfilm needed to break even. Deadline calculated a net loss of $76.9 million in 2019, and Forbes later updated the production-only pre-tax loss to $103.3 million. Original directors Phil Lord and Christopher Miller were fired roughly 80% of the way through principal photography over creative differences with Kathleen Kennedy and screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan. Ron Howard took over and directed extensive reshoots that trade reporting estimated at $25 to $35 million on their own. The loss caused Lucasfilm to immediately pull planned anthology films about Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi off the theatrical slate, and both were later reconfigured as Disney Plus limited series. Solo is the moment Lucasfilm stopped treating Star Wars as a release-per-year theatrical engine.
Quick note, if you're enjoying this so far, I post videos like this all the time, and a subscribe would really help out. Thanks. Justice League. After 5 years of cameos, post-credit teases, and the hard launch of Wonder Woman, Warner Brothers finally put Batman, Superman, and the Justice League in one movie, and the box office cost the studio its entire shared universe plan. Released November 17, 2017, the production budget ballooned to approximately $300 million, with marketing pushing total spend toward $500 million. Worldwide gross was $661.3 million, well below the estimated $750 million break-even. Deadline calculated a net loss of $60 million. Forbes estimated the range at $50 to $100 million. Director Zack Snyder stepped away from post-production after the death of his daughter, and Joss Whedon was brought in to oversee reshoots and rewrites. Whedon's reshoots reportedly cost more than $25 million, and the resulting theatrical cut was disowned by much of the cast in subsequent years. The financial result caused Warner Brothers to pivot away from a connected DCEU model, greenlighting standalone-driven films like Joker and The Batman that explicitly broke from continuity. The DCEU, as Warner Brothers conceived it, didn't survive this opening weekend, and the studio's later embrace of director-driven standalones, and eventually the James Gunn reboot, is a direct response. Pan. Warner Brothers bet $150 million on a Peter Pan origin movie starring Hugh Jackman as Blackbeard, and the franchise plans died on opening weekend. Released October 9, 2015, the production budget was about $150 million, with marketing pushing total spend to roughly $275 million per The Hollywood Reporter and The New York Times. Worldwide gross came in at $128.4 million. Bloomberg and The Hollywood Reporter both reported a $130 to $150 million loss. Joe Wright directed, with Jackman, Garrett Hedlund as Hook, and Rooney Mara as Tiger Lily, a casting choice that drew sustained criticism. Sequel and prequel plans were dropped after opening. Pan demonstrates how recognizable IP without a clear audience hook fails. Indiana Jones: Dial of Destiny. Indiana Jones is one of the most recognized characters in cinema history, with 4 globally hyped releases behind him, and the 5th installment cost Disney more than $130 million. Released June 30, 2023, the final budget hit $387.2 million, according to the numbers, including roughly $79 million in early 2023 post-production reshoot costs, putting it among the 3 most expensive films ever made. Worldwide gross was $384 million, below the production budget alone before factoring in marketing. Disney's reported loss totaled approximately $134.2 million per Deadline. James Mangold directed rather than Steven Spielberg, the first non-Spielberg indie film, and the production brought back Harrison Ford at age 80. The film featured digital de-aging in its prologue, and reshoots and visual effects rework drove the budget overruns. Disney marketed it aggressively as Ford's farewell to the role, positioning it as a Cannes premiere event. The audience skewed older, and The Hollywood Reporter cited a failure to attract under 25 viewers as a primary factor in the underperformance. Dial of Destiny is the case where brand recognition was real, marketing spend was massive, and the audience that grew up with the franchise simply didn't show up in theatrical numbers. Mortal Engines. Peter Jackson took the same producing template that built the Lord of the Rings empire, applied it to a young adult novel about cities on wheels, and lost more than $100 million for Universal. Released December 14, 2018, the production budget was just over $100 million, with marketing pushing total spend past $200 million. Worldwide gross came in around $84 million. Deadline calculated a loss of approximately $174 million when factoring all expenses against revenues, making it one of the largest single-film losses of that release year. Jackson and Fran Walsh wrote and produced, with directing handed to Christian Rivers. Conceived as the first of a 4-book franchise, sequel development was abandoned after opening weekend. Mortal Engines is the cleanest example of a recognizable creator brand failing to translate into a recognizable audience brand. Dark Universe. Universal announced an entire shared cinematic universe on a single press release, complete with cast photos and logos, and the launch movie killed the franchise before the second one ever entered production. The Mummy released June 9, 2017, with a production budget of approximately $125 million, and marketing pushed total spend to roughly $345 million per Universal's own filings. Worldwide gross was $410 million,
but with the high spend, Deadline calculated a loss of $60 to $95 million. The film starred Tom Cruise, Sofia Boutella, and Russell Crowe as Dr. Henry Jekyll, and was planned as the launchpad for an interconnected monster movie franchise the studio called The Dark Universe. Universal had publicly committed to follow-ups including Bride of Frankenstein, with Bill Condon directing and Angelina Jolie attached, plus Frankenstein's Monster, Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Van Helsing. After The Mummy underperformed, Bride of Frankenstein was pulled from the calendar in October of that year, and the entire slate was effectively canceled by 2019. Universal pivoted to standalone director-driven monster movies, and Lee Whannell's Invisible Man in 2020 was made for $7 million and grossed $144 million, vindicating the new approach. The pivot to small-budget standalones produced the actual hits.
King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. Warner Bros. Greenlit a 6-film King Arthur cinematic universe before the first one had even finished filming, and the opening weekend made sure none of the others ever got made. Released May 12, 2017, the budget was around $175 million, with marketing pushing total spend past $300 million. Worldwide gross came in at $148.7 million, and Deadline calculated a loss of roughly $153 million. Guy Ritchie directed, with Charlie Hunnam, Jude Law as Vortigern, and Eric Bana, and the studio's 6-film plan had been announced before photography even wrapped. The film opened to $15.4 million domestic, against tracking projecting closer to 25, and all 5 planned sequels were canceled within weeks. This is the textbook example of pre-announcing a cinematic universe based on a single film's projected performance. Ghostbusters, 2016. Ghostbusters is one of the most recognizable comedy properties in American film history, and Sony's 2016 reboot lost the studio more than $70 million and erased the planned sequel slate. Released July 15, 2016, the production budget was approximately $144 million, with marketing pushing total spend past $300 million per The Hollywood Reporter. Worldwide gross was $229.1 million, below the roughly $300 million the studio had publicly identified as break-even. The Hollywood Reporter calculated a loss of more than $70 million. Paul Feig directed, with a cast that included Melissa McCarthy, Kristen Wiig, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones, the franchise's first all-female lead lineup. Sony had publicly committed to 2 sequels and described the property as a tentpole franchise, but by November of that year, Feig confirmed the direct sequel would not be made. The financial damage contributed to Sony Pictures' $1 billion write-down announced in January of 2017. Sony eventually pivoted to Afterlife in 2021, which restored the original film canon and ignored the 2016 release. The pre-release online discourse around this film was unusually toxic and shaped the marketing, but the financial reality underneath was simple, and a recognizable brand with massive marketing ended up erasing the franchise plans entirely. John Carter. Disney based an entire planned trilogy on a 100-year-old Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, spent more than $250 million on the first installment, and announced a $200 million write-down within 2 weeks of release. Released March 9, 2012, the net production budget was approximately $263.7 million after a $42.9 million UK tax rebate, with marketing pushing total spend past $360 million. Worldwide theatrical gross came in at $284.1 million, $73 million domestic, and $211 million international. On March 20, 2012, Disney's then CFO Jay Rasulo announced a $200 million write-down on the film during the company's quarterly earnings call. Andrew Stanton, of Pixar, directed in his live-action debut, working from Edgar Rice Burroughs' 1912 novel, A Princess of Mars, which had influenced everything from Avatar to Star Wars. Marketing was widely criticized, with the title changed from John Carter of Mars to simply John Carter, mid-campaign, and trade outlets reported confusion about the film's genre and target audience. 2 sequels were already in development, with Stanton holding treatments for John Carter and the Gods of Mars, and a 3rd Mars trilogy installment, and both were canceled immediately. Disney's then studio chief Rich Ross resigned in April of that year, weeks after the write-down, and trade reporting attributed his departure directly to the cumulative cost of John Carter, and other 2011 and 2012 underperformers. The film has since developed a meaningful cult audience on home video and streaming, but the original theatrical write-down still ranks among the largest ever publicly disclosed by a single studio. It functions as a cautionary example, a recognizable IP for sci-fi readers
does not equal a recognizable IP for a global theatrical audience, and a budget that size leaves no margin for that gap.
The Lone Ranger. Disney looked at the success of Pirates of the Caribbean and decided to do the same trick with a different IP. Same producer, same star, same scale, and lost almost $200 million in the process. Released July 3rd, 2013, the production budget came in around $215 to $225 million after multiple shutdowns and a relocation, with marketing pushing total spend toward $400 million. Worldwide theatrical gross was $260.5 million. Disney announced an expected loss of $160 to $190 million during its third quarter fiscal 2013 earnings call, and CFO Jay Rasulo cited the film as the primary driver of the studio's quarterly miss. Jerry Bruckheimer produced, Gore Verbinski directed, and Johnny Depp starred as Tonto, with Armie Hammer as the Lone Ranger, explicitly modeling the Pirates of the Caribbean creative pipeline. Production was halted in August of 2011 over budget concerns, and Disney threatened to cancel until Bruckheimer, Verbinski, and Depp agreed to defer salary and reduce the budget by approximately $35 million. The Tonto casting and characterization drew sustained criticism for cultural appropriation throughout pre-release press, and Depp publicly blamed critics for the film's failure in a joint Variety interview with Hammer and Bruckheimer. The loss exceeded John Carter's write-down from the previous year, briefly making it the largest single-film loss in Disney history at the time of release. Combined with John Carter and Mars Needs Moms, the cumulative losses contributed to Disney's strategic shift toward franchise-driven IP, with Marvel, Lucasfilm, and Pixar pulling the weight rather than original creation tentpoles. The Lone Ranger is the moment Disney stopped trying to manufacture franchises from scratch around movie stars and started buying them. If you found this worth your time, consider subscribing to keep up with all future uploads. Thanks for watching.